Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ahsan, and the model that I've chosen is fiscal and monetary policy, and we'll be discussing it through the Keynesian aggregate demand approach. By understanding the economic stabilization through policy tools, so let's begin without wasting any time. Introduction to fiscal and monetary policy. So what the importance of we're going to discuss the importance of fiscal and monetary policy. Basically, they help control inflation, unemployment, and the economic growth. Fiscal policy, which consists of government spending and taxes, and monetary policy, which consists of interest rates and money supply, are used to stabilize the economy. Uh, and during recession or booms, these tools help bring balance. Moving on to the Keynesian aggregate demand framework. It was developed by John Maynard Keynes and focused on total demand in the economy and its impact on output and employment. And it suggests that the demand drives the economy, especially in the short run. The objective of this video presentation is to understand the principles of fiscal and monetary policy through the Keynesian perspective. Through the graphical representations, it provides a clear understandings for both the students and the policymakers. Moving on to the model description. The overview of the Keynesian aggregate demand framework. It suggests that the aggregate demand framework possesses the total spending in an economy directly dictates output when the prices are generally fixed. For example, if the demand is low, the economy slows down, then the government can step in with spending on tax cuts to boost the demand. It assumes that the prices and wages can be sticky, so market don't always self-correct, so the government has to intervene. Moving on to the key variables in aggregate demand. The first one is consumption, which is denoted by C, which means spending by households, followed by investments, denoted by I, which is the spending by businesses, and G stands for government spending, which is the public sector expenditure, and net exports, X minus M, which is exports minus import. So the total aggregate demand is made up of consumption plus investments plus government spending plus X minus M, which means exports minus imports. The assumptions of this model operates under certain assumptions. It mainly considers a closed economy with fixed prices, which does not respond swiftly to demand changes. And it also assumes that the economy may function below full employment. So now we'll be moving on to the types of policies, and we'll be understanding them through the graphical representations. So the first policy, we'll be talking about expansionary fiscal policy. So what is an expansionary fiscal policy? It's basically is when the government spend more or cut taxes to help the economy grow, and the goal is to increase demand, reduce unemployment, and to boost the economic activity. So in the graph, we can see that due to the expansionary fiscal stance, the aggregate demand is increased from 80 to 81, and this happens as the demand is increased due to tax cuts and increased spending of the government. Now we can see the new macroeconomic equilibrium is at E1, where the new aggregate demand curve is 81. The new price level is PL1, and now it can be seen that the new real GDP, which was Y0 earlier, is now Y1, and we can see that it is in increase. Moving on to the contractionary fiscal policy, basically it is the opposite of expansionary fiscal policy. The government spends less or raises taxes to slow down the economy in order to reduce inflation and control excessive spending. This is mostly in times of economy boom. For example, cutting government programs or increasing income taxes. As we can see, that when the tax in the graph that when the tax rates are increased and the government spending is decreased, the aggregate demand curve is shifted towards left from 81 to 82. Now the new equilibrium point is E1. The real GDP is decreased from Y1 to Y2, showing a fall in output and a rise in unemployment. The general price level is decreased from P1 to P2, showing a decrease in inflation. Moving on to the expansionary monetary policy, which means that basically this is a policy indirectly introduced by the government through central banks, which lowers the interest rates or prints more money to encourage borrowing or spending. And the goal is to make it easier to get loans, boost investment, and increase spending. As we can see in the graph, that when the interest rate is decreased and the money supply is increased, the aggregate demand curve is shifted towards right from 81 to 82. The new equilibrium point is E1. The real GDP is increased from Y1 to Y2, which shows the economic growth and a fall in unemployment. And the price level is increased from P1 to P2, which results in inflation, which is a side effect of an expansionary monetary policy. Moving on to the contractionary monetary policy. This is the opposite of expansionary monetary policy when the central bank raises interest rates and reduces the money supply to slow down borrowing and spending, and the goal is to control inflation. As we can see, when the interest rate is decreased and the money supply is increased, the aggregate demand shifts towards the right from 81 to 82. And now the new equilibrium is E1 and the GDP is increased from Y1 to Y2. Now we'll be discussing some real-world applications and followed by the conclusion. The first is the COVID-19 stimulus when in response to the COVID-19 crisis, when US was in recession, it invested in the form of government spending in its healthcare sector. This was a form of an expansionary fiscal policy, effectively boosted aggregate demand, helping to counteract the economic recessions caused by lockdowns. Now we'll be talking about the 2008 financial crisis report. That in response to the financial crisis post 2008, the Federal Reserve lowered down its interest rates and uh, and expanded the money supply through quantitative easing. This expansionary monetary policy stimulated borrowing and investment, promoting a gradual recovery in aggregate demand. This was a form that the expansionary monetary policy was introduced because there was a time of recession, and in order to get out of the financial crisis, the Federal Reserve lowered down interest rates to boost investment. Now we'll be talking about the third example, 2022 interest rate hikes. That was a policy introduced by the government in order to combat rising inflation in 2022. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates significantly, and thus controlling price increases and highlighting the challenges of managing inflation and growth. This contractionary monetary policy aimed to basically reduce the aggregate demand in order to combat inflation. However, in order to combat inflation, the side effect is increase in unemployment. So now we'll be talking about the strengths of the Keynesian framework, which is that it explains why recessions happens and how we can fix them, and it also shows us the importance of government actions during turndowns, and it is most useful in short-run economic analysis. While talking about the limitations of this framework, it is less effective in explaining long-term growth, and it also may ignore supply-side factors like productivity, and the government spending can lead to debt or inefficiency. Finally, concluding thoughts on this framework and the economic stabilization, that this Keynesian aggregate demand approach offers foundational insights into both the policy's fiscal and monetary policies that can enhance economic stabilizations, and and understanding its applications and limitations is important for both students and policymakers to understand how to derive a solution in order to imply effective economic management in various contexts. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.